Kim Pugh from Wind Vineyards here in Smithfield. They dealt with some cold temperatures as well, but not quite as bad. Thank goodness at Wind, they came through in a little bit better shape. But I want to talk to Kim about some of the challenges of grape growing, and you had so much to share with me. About a year and a half ago, Kim and I first met to discuss kind of climate change, and we talked about vectors not dying off during milder winters. But one of the things you stressed, Kim, was how an early season warm-up followed by late season frost could really spell big trouble, and that's what we saw earlier this week.
Absolutely. Good morning, Craig. It's good to see you. It's good to see you. And it was good to see that last piece with some green behind them on those vines. That's very, very good to see. Some of the vineyards lost 70 to 80, 90%. And as you said earlier in the piece, all the way up through Pennsylvania, Maryland, southern Pennsylvania, New York. I also saw some reports even in Ohio and back to Michigan. So quite a bit of damage out there. So what will happen is, as they indicated on that last piece that you interviewed, that they will go through and assess what vines are still living and what green they have. And they will cut back the vines or however far they have to go. Hopefully there's no trunk damage there, and the vine itself will survive. So what happens is we spoke about this, as you said, a year and a half ago. We have these swings, this seesaw effect with with the climate, and whether or not it's due to climate change, it is a climate issue. So we had a very cold January here, as you know, and we actually did have some damage here for that, but not horrendous. The vines themselves have survived, although we're treating some of the new vines like one-year-old vines again this year. However, then we moved on to at the end of March, beginning of April, we had very warm temperatures. You know, we had out into the western part of the state up into the 80s. So we end up with this where we have early bud break, the shoots, the buds break, the shoots start to grow up. They're very tender. And so I want to just kind of put it in perspective a little bit. It's just like if you fill an ice cube tray, and most people realize that, water, when it freezes, expands a certain percentage, depending, anywhere from 9 to 10%. The same thing happens with living things, with cells. All cells are comprised of water and to a certain degree. And so what happens is when those cells freeze, then the water within the cells turns to crystal, and the cell wall itself ruptures. Well, there's no way for the plant to stand back up. So then you get that drooping, the buds themselves, the foliage, it becomes stunted and actually just dies. It's just like, anything else where the cells are destroyed. So that's essentially the little bit of the science I can give you on what happens with these grapevines when they freeze.
Kim, as we take a look here, early in April, we had temperatures up into the mid-80s. It got a little cooler that second week, but here in Hampton Roads, we were looking at record heat. What does that do? That triggers that natural, reaction from the vines. They start thinking, hey, it's time to go, and they start to produce more. Then you get hit. This was a particularly bad setup, not just for, central Virginia and northern Virginia, but as we mentioned, through the mid-Atlantic. Is this the type of variability that as a wine grower or as a grape grower that you need to be most concerned with?
Absolutely. Not just grape growers, but I'm sure that there were a number of orchards that were hit as well. And, as any farmer knows, agriculture, it's kind of a crapshoot. You never know. You have to rely on the weather for all things, whether it's freeze or excessive rainfall or no rainfall. There are so many things that affect the variability of what's going to happen. So we did see, and so for summer wind, we're fortunate. One, we're here in southeastern Virginia, even though we're close to the coast. We're also surrounded, you and I have discussed in the past, we're a little bit of peninsula here, so we're surrounded by water. or not surrounded, but on three sides. And so I think that does help mitigate some of the issues that we may have with frost. We did sustain some damage, but not excessive, just tips of some of the earlier budding varieties like our Alvarino. I've had to cut some when I say a tip, I'm talking an inch or two off, but
Okay.
the buds themselves are still doing fine and they'll put out some secondary shoots. So we are very fortunate from that aspect. However, when you're in a low-lying area we had earlier bud break. One of the things I've seen here at Summer Wind is not only did we have earlier bud break, but that warmth caused the shoots to really grow rapidly and tall.
Well,
So more so than usual in the end of April.
it's interesting, you're there protected with the James and the Pagan River, so that kept your temperatures a little bit warmer, and you came through in pretty good shape. But I'm interested in your thoughts because you said your winemakers were reaching out saying, hey, a lot of our growers in other parts of the region took the harder hits. How long before something like that translates to what consumers may find, either with the availability of wines, how much of a lag is there before, these grapes that maybe aren't growing as much in other parts of the Commonwealth or farther north through the region, when does that translate to when we might see some limitations maybe down the road at the table?
So in the short term, what you're going to see is probably you'll see much less of a harvest this year in those vineyards where things were severely affected. And so that less harvest translates to less wine on the table. Fortunately, I think a lot of the vineyards have done well over the last couple of years, so they will have wine in in their inventory. However, the other long-term effect that may be is you never know if we don't have many shoots this year, how healthy the trunk of the vine it is. The entire vine has to stay healthy.
Sure.
If the trunks are healthy and they put out new buds next year, that will be a good thing. The other thing they will rely on in these vineyards this year is they're hoping for secondary bud break. Unfortunately, not all secondary buds are fruitful. So some of that depends on the variety itself. The other thing that we're seeing is that many of the vines affected were the white varieties. In some cases, some Merlot and Cabernet Franc, depending on how low they were planted or if they were planted closer to water or not. So some of it depends on, the whites tend to have earlier bud break. So they're the ones that have been the most affected. But again, that also depends on where the vine is located in the vineyard, where the vineyard is located. So, in the short term and the long run, these vineyards will have to assess, how healthy the vine is overall.
All right. Well, Kim, I thank you so much. I know you're busy right now, continuing to work your vineyard, and I want to thank you so much. And I'll just mention, if you've never been out to Summer Wind out in Smithfield, you need to do it. Your tasting room is beautiful, and it's just a really neat place to go. And obviously, Kim, you and your daughter have a lot of knowledge to share. So thank you so much for being with us this morning, and good luck with the upcoming season.
Hey, thank you, Craig. Good to see you.
Take care, Kim.